Welcome to episode 38 of Rail Talk. My name is Joe Bianca. I'm an ownership advisor at West Point Thoroughbreds, and I want to start this show giving a major shout out to friend of the show and Rail Talk special correspondent Skip Anderson, who got his master's degree last Friday. We tuned into the presentation. His thesis was about the effect of media on horse sales, which is obviously something that we've seen grow over the past decade or so. And the comparison of horses who sold with media and without media, it was fascinating. It was well presented. Skip, we're so proud of you, buddy.
Jonathan Green, general manager of DJ Stable. This is the 2018 version of me. I've gone back in time, and unfortunately, I'm making the same mistakes I did previously by going back onto a podcast. But Joe, it's good to see you. And I have a special personal shout out as well. My college roommate and best man at my wedding, Michael Spike Sirac, is 54 years old today. Happy birthday, Spike. I love you, buddy.
And John is now 14 years old today without the beard. So,
yeah, there was a wardrobe malfunction. I got a little too close to the razor, and I just had to at that point clean the canvas, as they say. The thing is, Joe, I went into it thinking like somebody had told me, hey, if you shave, it makes everything look bigger. And I was like, I'm all over that. But yeah, my nose definitely looks bigger now. So I went the wrong part of the anatomy, apparently.
Rail Talk is sponsored by TaylorMade. The deadlines are coming. 23 days, a little over 23 days as we record this from the May 1st deadline for the summer yearling sales. And if you want to be taken care of at the yearling sales, TaylorMade is the place to go. They have a great deep bench, deep staff who's been doing this for years, for decades, will take care of your horses and the clients as if they're family. That's the way they've done it. That's the way they've built their reputation. They are leading consigners pretty much every single yearling sale. They've consigned dozens of grade one winners. They do everything the right way. We can attest to this. We know the Taylors, especially John, and the way that they run their business with integrity and honor and thoroughness in terms of getting your horses to the sale and getting them to achieve the highest price possible. So go to TaylorMadeFarm.com, enter with TaylorMade before those yearling sale deadlines pass. They'll take care of you, like I said, like family, and get you the best possible return on all those babies. All right, so we're pretty much all set on the Derby preps. We're going to have a good idea in the next week or two about what the field will look like for Kentucky Derby 150, plus or minus Hades, because we got Hades running in Lexington coming up, see if he can squeeze his way into the Derby. But we had several major preps over the weekend, the Santa Anita Derby, the Wood, and the Bluegrass. I'm going to start with the Bluegrass just because I think that the top two horses are going to be amongst the favorites in the Kentucky Derby. I think Sierra Leone will probably be second choice after Fierceness. I was against him on Saturday. I was all over Just a Touch. I had everything singled to him. I thought they both ran big. I thought the pace was pretty quick, and Just a Touch really did most of the dirty work up front, tracking in second the whole time. But Sierra Leone, it's not easy to close the way he does from the 10 post in a shorter stretch that Keeneland has. So he's done a lot in a short amount of time to rocket up the leaderboard. I'm generally going to play against those horses in the Derby just because I think they need too much help and too much traffic navigation to win a race like that at a short price. But he was very impressive. The top two were both really impressive. I think Dornoch kind of got exposed a little bit, that he's just not at that elite level in terms of the 3-year-olds, at least at this moment. It's a long season. But, John, I thought the first two on Cross the Wire in the Bluegrass were better than pretty much any Derby prep I've seen thus far, except for Fierceness and the Florida Derby.
I think of the weekend, it was certainly the most impressive win and the most impressive race. Sierra Leone, again, we kind of keep pointing to the fact that he was a $2.3 million Fasig-Tipton graduate, and that it's tough to live up to it. I think it's safe to say if he hadn't lived up to it in the Risen Star, he's definitely lived up to it after the Bluegrass. Joe, I was surprised that not only did he go against the trend and made up a ton of ground, which was impressive, but it looked like he could have kept going. It looked like he could have gone another lap around that track and not lost a step. So going from the 1.8 to 1.25 miles, for a lot of horses, it's a big problem. It won't be a problem. The horse has shown that he can run on a fast racetrack, on a sloppy racetrack, on a muddy racetrack. He can, keep himself to within a couple of lengths, but he really prefers to be 10, 12 lengths out of it and make a serious run. I'm impressed that you were wheeling just a touch in that race, because it was a pretty deep field. You had BU that broke his maiden, Rapoli horse broke his maiden with a 96 buyer. Top Connor on the rail, who also was very impressive, winning first time out at Gulfstream. He was in the post 1 of 11 at Gulfstream and won easily. And really, I think the post hurt him this time because he had to go. He had to be forced out there and go. And you'll be hearing from Top Connor, I think, in the, maybe in the mile, or maybe in some of the undercard races. But as he gets older, I think he's going to be another interesting horse. He was $1 million 2-year-old purchase. Sees the Gray that had 27 points going into the race, and had run, I don't know, what did he run, like 27 times as a 2-year-old, 3-year-old already, Joe, for
Yep.
For the coach. And then, we haven't even mentioned Dornoch, who, look, on the one hand, if he wasn't the full brother to the Derby winner Mage, people wouldn't be talking as much about him. I think that in my heart of hearts, I'm not necessarily sure that they had him fully cranked for the Bluegrass, as silly as it sounds, because it's a grade 1 and it's in Danny Gargan's backyard. And I'm sure he wanted to win that one, but he had enough points to get in. And I'm sure it was just a matter of, all right, we're going to run the race and see how he does. Is he as good as Sierra Leone or just a touch? I don't think so. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that I expect a bounce back from him, I should say, going into the Kentucky Derby. And Joe, the other one I wanted to mention was Good Money, because I know you're really savvy about this stuff. But the second that he started jumping around in the gate and almost broke through, like they had to really calm him down. Once he got into the gate, that doomed him. He didn't have a chance at that point. And he kind of ran like it. He kind of, he ran up the racetrack after putting in a good, 6 or 7 furlong race at that point. Again, I think that's a horse that you want to keep an eye on down the road. He, on the other hand, where we talked about all these expensive yearling and 2-year-old purchases, for a good magic out of that female family for $100,000 yearling, he probably, I'm guessing, has a confirmation flaw or two, or maybe had an issue with his vetting to only bring $100,000 as a yearling. But I think you're going to be hearing from him down the road as well, if they can calm his mind down a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that was only his 3rd career start, so he still got upside. I don't know. I heard the same thing about Dornoch in the Fountain of Youth. I wasn't cranked for that race, and that's why he only beat that 99-1 shot by a length and 3/4 or whatever it was. I just think he's not as good as the other top 3-year-olds in the country. Maybe I'll be proven wrong on Derby Day, but like, this is 2 races in a row that I've heard he wasn't fully cranked. I'm going to move on just briefly to the Wood Memorial, because I was there on Saturday at Aqueduct. It was great crowd, honestly. I haven't seen that many people at Aqueduct probably since the Pope was there in the 90s. But it was there? Yes. In like the early 90s, he led a mass. It was like 75,000 people there.
Wow.
And I know. And it's usually you're the Pope of New York racing.
I was just going to say, like, they must have lost my my invitation in the mail. But okay, sorry, go on.
The place would burst into flames if you and the Pope were there.
No question.
At the same time, I think.
No question.
But anywho, the Wood Memorial was won by Resilience, who is a kind of a slow developing Bill Mott type, who I think will probably be heard from in the Triple Crown going forward. But honestly, man, like that race, I'm so thankful that this horse was okay. But I'm sure you all saw a deposition who was 157-1 in that race go down in the stretch, and I assumed the worst. I was like, that was it for me for the day. Like I had to ship out after that. And I just think there's still trauma after the events of last summer at Saratoga, at least in my mind, watching races. Like, I'm kind of expecting the worst sometimes, and it certainly looked like the worst would be true in that case. Great reporting by Dave Grenning, Steve Bick, and the guys who were following up to make sure that horse was okay. He was able to walk off on his own power and seems fine. Like, even forgetting like all the leg stuff that could happen. He could have broken his neck. Like, it could have gone wrong in so many different ways. He was okay. Other than that, there wasn't much to say about the race. Like, once Deterministic didn't show up, it kind of really fell apart into like a one other than allowance, I would say, as evidenced by a 106-1, a 38-1, and an 80-1 shot following home Resilience. And the Santa Anita Derby, like, I think without Nisos, like, that's a very, very average crop of 3-year-olds out in California. I think that's been proven several times in these prep races. So there's not too much to say about that. The big story was about Frankie Dettori winning 6 in a row, which we can get to in a second. But John, any thoughts from the Wood or Santa Anita Derby?
The California horses, I think, are going to be a little bit of a disappointment. And man, if that is not a soundbite for when Stronghold wins the Kentucky Derby, I don't know what is. But of the 3 preps that ran on Saturday, it was the weakest. It was the slowest. He earned an 89 buyer to win, which is only 1 point less than the Wood. But a good 9-10 points behind the winner and second place horses of the Bluegrass. It's a little disappointing that there's not going to be something coming in from the West, but we anticipated that when they extended Bafford's ban for the 2024 Kentucky Derby. Bafford did finish second with Imagination, and they were well up the field, well up the track with the rest of the field in that race. Tapalo, again, had a bad break. I don't know how he would have really fared against the upper echelon group of the California crop. Tinky, our friend Tinky, commented with great information last show about should these Derby preps all be grade 1s. I think he said none of them should be grade 1s, which I don't necessarily agree with, but the grading system is something that needs to be rehauled. And that's for another show as well, Joe. I don't want the takeaway of the Wood to be just about deposition, because Resilience, earned 100 points and is now squarely going to be running in the Kentucky Derby, another Into Mischief horse, followed by another Good Magic. We keep hearing that name over and over again. He's almost like the new gun runner, as it were. Good Magic with another Danny Gargan Good Magic Society man that Danny owns a piece of. That'll be in the gate for the Kentucky Derby. Deterministic was a disappointment. I think you're right, though. I think he's kind of coming back down to earth and running against some more quality horses, and it's showing. But the thing about the Wood that I'll walk away with was the whole deposition issue. And Joe, I like when smaller trainers like Uriah St. Louis come in and they buy their own. Uriah in particular buys his own horses, usually at a modest price, shows up in these races, occasionally, hits the board. His philosophy in interviews in the past has been, I pay $10,000-$20,000 for a horse. If I run 5th in the Wood Memorial, that more than pays for the horse. And I understand where he's coming from on that. But I have a real issue with people who are running horses way out of their league. It's one thing if you want to run a horse and it's 20-1, 31, that the horse is peaking, the horse is coming into a good race. But Deposition in particular have proven time and time again that he just wasn't of this class. He finished 6th, 4th, 7th. The only time he hit the board was when he won in a maiden special weight race in November at Parks, and he was 800-1 for a reason. And it used to drive me nuts when Luch used to do this in all the big races. And look, it's their horses. They can do whatever they want with it. The thing that bothers me is when you get into these bigger fields and it's just one more horse that the legitimate contenders need to get through by around. And it'd be a very different conversation right now if Deposition had fallen differently on the racetrack instead of going straight down. If he had leaned left or right because he was in between horses when it all happened and had taken out a horse or two, or a couple of horses behind him had to seriously steer around or go over him because there was an issue. Now, I'm not saying that Uriah St. Louis was running a horse in a race that the horse physically wasn't able to handle. It wasn't like he knew that the horse was going to have an issue of that caliber. Of course, he wouldn't have run the horse. And of course, the stewards and the vets would have pulled the horse if they thought there was any inclination that there was an issue, because that seems to be the way things are going now, which is to err on the side of caution. So I'm not saying that it was predetermined that the horse wasn't 100%. I'm just saying that sometimes these horses shouldn't be in these races because other than the free lunch that you're getting, there's no way possible that horse was going to hit the board and do anything. And I'm not the only one saying it. There were 20,000 people at Aqueduct that were betting literally against him and saying that as well.
Rail Talk is sponsored by the Green Group, the number one accounting firm in the horse business. There's one reason they're number one. No other CPA firm knows the horse industry like they do. Len's got over 200 horses with DJ Stable, and they've won over 2,500 races. Green Group's got over 800 clients in the horse business because they save them money and make them money and save them taxes. And there's a special offer for listeners of Rail Talk. Now, this is going to expire very soon because we got April 15th. I mean, the consultation never expires, but in terms of getting it done for your 2024 tax returns, go see Len right now. He's offering a complimentary, confidential half-hour consultation, guaranteeing you'll get value. Call him up, 732-634-5100. Do it quickly. Or if you filed for an extension, do it now anyway. You might have until October to file those taxes, but there might be a little bit of downtime after the April 15th deadline. Len can take care of you. And, like I said, always just sitting at Len's foot is a great experience in terms of learning about business and racing and accounting. Dude is just a fount of knowledge. I haven't seen him a little bit. Is he coming to the April sale, John?
He will be there at the April sale with all these tax returns that are in-house right now, Joe. He's focusing on saving people some money. But you're right. If you go on extension and you're not using Len, if you go on extension and you haven't filed your 2023 tax return, you should definitely have him look at it, because now it's like a really no risk. You have until October 15th to file that extension. And if he saves you money on the extension, imagine not having to pay additional monies out of your pocket for taxes, because Len has swooped in and once again given you opportunity to save money.
A couple other noteworthy performances from the weekend. Denim and Pearls ran a huge race, 98 buyer in the Beaumont yesterday. Wesley Ward had a horse that he had sent to Royal Ascot come back and win the Palisade Stakes. Vava and Alvastar renewed their rivalry in the Madison. That was a really exciting race. We came up a little short with Vava at West Point, but those are just clearly, to me, the two best fillies in that filly and mare sprint division. So they put on a show. In terms of individual accomplishments, how about Frankie Dettori winning 6 straight races at Santa Anita? He capped it off with Nothing Like You in the Santa Anita Oaks, and that was a big upset. A lot of people were expecting Kinza. Kinza was the kind of horse that had enough buzz that a lot of people were basically saying, oh, maybe she should try the boys in the Derby. And then, lo and behold, another Baffert horse comes and blows her off the racetrack. Must be nice to have that level of arsenal. So that was, those are a couple of the noteworthy results. But the other thing about Frankie's run is these were not a bunch of favorites that he was riding. Like Ball Don't Lie paid $660, Recinte Rompere paid $18.20, Roberta's Love paid $21.60, Catherine Marissa paid $15, Nothing Like You paid $16.40, and Royal Charter paid $10.80. So 5 out of the 6 were double-digit mutuals. So it's just, it's kind of a full circle thing for us, John, because like this is episode 0 of this show. We were just doing our little tease. We talked about Frankie Dettori and his retirement, his send-off, his farewell at Royal Ascot. But man, I think we're the benefit that he decided to do the lame farewell tour and then non-retirement thing, because he is one of the best riders in the world, pound for pound, and he really hasn't done this before in terms of riding in America full time. He's kicked ass at Santa Anita. I'm sure he's going to kick ass in the Kentucky or New York or wherever he goes for the rest of the year. So that was what stuck out to me otherwise from the weekend. But I know John's got a little bit of a bee in his bonnet because we were talking about, or unless you want to talk about Frankie first.
Yeah, just talk about Frankie first, if you don't mind. I mean, it's awe-inspiring when you have a jockey that wins that many races in a row, whether it's consistent, $5,000 claiming races or races of this caliber. And Joe, you mentioned that all of the good stats of the fact that majority of the horses that Frankie rode were double-digit winners. And you go back and you think, all right, the betting public's pretty savvy. They pick up on things like that. So imagine, just the fact that he was winning all these races, and the horses still weren't favorites by the end. I mean, they still, they still weren't even the chalk going into the race. So, a tip of the cap to him. I'm so glad that he's not retiring, this year. And the thing that surprised me is I was going through, which riders were going to ride which horses in the Kentucky Derby. As of now, he still doesn't have a mount. He doesn't have a mount in the Kentucky Derby. I mean, that he will, but as of this moment, the top dozen or 15 or so horses that are planning on running the Kentucky Derby have not selected him. So it just, to me, that was a head scratcher. Obviously, that'll be taken care of in the next week or so once things continue to focus and work their way through. But yeah, as of now, some of the top riders, including him, Torres doesn't have a mount. Juan Hernandez doesn't have a mount. Lascano doesn't have a mount for the Kentucky Derby. Again, all those things will be, addressed, I'm sure, over the next week or two. But Frankie Dettori, just, in his swan song of his year, the back nine of his career, is quickly turning his life into a Disney movie.
Yeah. Incredible. He's obviously got a full personality too. So it's great to see him catch on in America. But on the Derby topic.
On the Derby topic,
on it now.
Thank you. No, I'll keep it brief. So Hades, we decided, was feeling good. He really only ran like half a mile, 5 furlongs in the Florida Derby. And we're going for that last bite of the apple in Lexington to try to run in there. And of course, as we entered the horse, they're like, oh, by the way, the Wine Steward is going to be running, coming off a 7-month layoff, and to try to see if he can get some points and get himself back in the Derby picture. So it's going to be an interesting race. It's not going to be an easy race, but it's a grade 3 at Keeneland. It shouldn't be that easy. In this day and age of people constantly beating the drum of, you need to run your horses more. You need to have your horses, why they're so brittle. They're so, blah, blah, blah. Why are you giving your horse 6-8 weeks between races and blah, blah. And I understand, where that pessimism and criticism come from. But we decided to run Hades in the Lexington. Not that I need to give a reason why to defend myself, but I want the audience to understand why certain decisions are made, because it helps, them understand the rationale of what we do. So Hades came out of his race, and I would say that, again, he looked at it as if it was like a 5 furlong breeze. He really didn't get a chance to run. He came out of it great. We didn't have to give him any major fluids or anything like that, because he just didn't run very hard, very far, I should say. So when we were kicking around the idea of what should we do with him next, we had a whole game plan all set of sending him to Monmouth, our backyard racetrack, running him in the Long Branch, and then 4 weeks later in the Pegasus, and then hopefully 4 weeks later in the Haskell. And we could have done that, and we probably would have won, one, if not both of those Haskell preps for him. But Joe, he was doing so well, and really he was the second, third choice in the Florida Derby, that we felt like he didn't show his best race, and physically he was doing great. Why not run him in the Lexington and see what happens? Now, unless he wins the Lexington, he probably won't have enough points. It looks to me, based on my calculation, that you're going to need 41 points to guarantee a spot, because you got the 2 horses coming in from Japan that are taking up 2 of the 20 stalls in the starting gate. But what people have to understand is that we at DJ Stable take every horse's personality into consideration before we make decisions. So sometimes horses do need 6 or 8 weeks between races, aka or IE, I guess is a better way of putting it. When we did it with Helium, he needed that extra time between the Tampa Bay Derby and the Kentucky Derby, because he was still developing. He still needed time to fill out, and there were a couple things mentally that we needed to work with him. Hades, on the other hand, ran his 2 best races 3 weeks apart. When he won as a maiden, and then we wheeled him back in again. It was a maiden and a other than. It wasn't like a grade 1 into the Lexington. But he ran his 2 best races, and then we ran him back again and ran a huge race in the Holy Bull. So they were all within 4 or 5 weeks of each other. And for him, that's his clock. He likes to run every month or so, if not sooner. So we're giving him the opportunity to do that. We're monitoring him carefully. We're not going to put a horse in harm's way just for the sake of having a chance to get more points for the Kentucky Derby. Why the hell would we ruin a good horse, or potentially ruin a good horse, just because we want him to run in the Kentucky? That's ludicrous. Absolutely asinine if we did that, because we worked so hard to get a horse in at that level of the caliber of racing. So for those haters out there, you can't have it fucking both ways. You can't say, why aren't you running your horses more often? And then when we run a horse, because we feel like that he's doing well, when we run a horse after a couple of weeks, after basically a public breeze in the Florida Derby, you can't say, why are you running your horse? In 2 weeks, you're going to ruin him. And that's exactly the way that guy sounded, by the way. I'm not hiding. I'll hide his name, but I won't hide his voice. But Joe, obviously, if we felt like that Hades wasn't a legitimate top 15 or 20 colts in our division, we wouldn't be doing this. Number one, we more importantly wouldn't be doing it if we thought any way, shape, or form it was going to hurt the horse, because we feel like he owes us nothing and he's got a long career ahead of us. And I have a partner in this horse, so it's not just my decision. It's my decision. It's his decision. It's Joe Orsino. It's decision who's won big races before. So for the people out there who are just taking pot shots about why you're doing this, yeah, you know what? 90% of the time, you're going to be right. We shouldn't be doing certain things with horses because they're not going to win. And if we win the Lexington and we run in the Kentucky Derby, you're right. You have a 95% chance that you're going to be right if you bet against us. But even 95% chance if you bet against anybody in the Kentucky Derby. And the whole point of the exercise is to try to maximize your horse's health and maximize your horse's potential.
Rail Talk is sponsored by Fasig-Tipton. Note, the Fasig-Tipton April digital sale is open right now. You can put in bids as we speak. It runs through tomorrow, Tuesday, April 9th. So you're probably going to see this early Tuesday morning. So get in right now on all those Fasig digital horses. We've spoken about it before. It's a great way to buy a horse, turn around, run in some big races, maybe even a couple of weeks later. So you can't beat that in terms of quick action on the racetrack. In terms of action on the racetrack, John mentioned it earlier, Sierra Leone was a topper at the Fasig-Tipton Saratoga sale 2 years ago and is now looking at like one of the top contenders on the Kentucky Derby trail. So we're all looking forward. We all got the dates circled on our calendars. August 5th and 6th this year is the Saratoga Selected Yearling Sale, an event like no other in horse racing. Lots of action in the meantime with the digital sales and the Mid-Atlantic sale and the July Yearlings and Horses of Racing Age sale. But yeah, if you want those big hitters, those Triple Crown contenders, those stallion candidates, be there August 5th and 6th in Saratoga Springs. All right, so the HIWU sheriff is in town recently. We've had a couple of major suspensions. The first one, and I think the more noteworthy one, is Robertino Diodoro is provisionally suspended by the Horse Racing Integrity and Welfare Unit for alleged possession of the banned substance levothyroxine, which is a thyroid medication. So, I mean, this is not a failed drug test. This was basically an investigation, a barn raid, whatever you want to call it, and they found the drug in his possession. I mean, this is, to me, obviously, I don't want to say anything definitive because I've never been in Robertino Diodoro's barn. I've never seen him treat a horse. But just from a handicapper's perspective, this was one of the guys I noticed last summer when HIWU first came into effect, whose winning percentage dropped. And it had bounced back up in 2024. He's having a strong meet at Oaklawn. But I had noticed a lot of his horses at Saratoga were not running the way they usually run, especially off of the claim. And this is a guy that a lot of people have had whispers and had suspicions about for a long time. And I think it'd be interesting to see what the industry reaction to this is, because when a guy like Rusty Arnold gets popped, everybody rushes to his defense. And I think with good reason, like he's been in the game for decades and has a very good reputation. I'm curious if there's going to be the same kind of rush to defend Robertino Diodoro. I haven't really seen that. And I think that kind of speaks volumes, that there hasn't been a huge industry outcry in defense of this dude. He's a guy who operates mainly in claiming races, but has gotten some better stock over the years, has gotten some higher priced auction buys, has won some big races. But, just being fair, calling a spade, this is not a surprising suspension to me. We'll see how it all works out and how it gets adjudicated. But John, this is one of the guys that, if we had to write a list of people we had suspicions of in 2023, he would have been on that list, at least for me.
Joe, I am shocked, appalled, and surprised. Said nobody in the horse business about this situation.
I know.
This is a guy who, when we wrote our list way back when Jason Service and Jorge Navarro were getting investigated, I know internally we wrote a list down, and he was definitely one of the top 10, 15 people that was on that list. And it's amazing to me like when trainers who the bettors know are doing something. Okay. And the horses are running and claiming races and stuff like that. The industry as a whole in the past, the industry as a whole kind of looked the other way, and they were like, that's fine. It's a claiming race. Who cares? Except for the bettors and the people running in the claiming races. But once these guys who may or may not be using things, but are winning at a much higher percentage than the training abilities, show, start creeping into the going from the claiming races, graduating to allowance races, then graduating to stake races. All of a sudden, then people get their backs up and start looking into them, or start, rightfully so. Diodoro was one of those guys. He was one of those guys where he was winning at I'm looking at the numbers now. It was 23%, 26%, 26%, 25%, 25%, 16, it's going to be 23%. And then that's all the way through, basically winning one out of every 4 races he was entering in from 2013 all the way to the present. That's not necessarily something that you would expect to see. His horses had a tendency to what we call rebreak, which is really a fallacy in itself, but that's a whole other story. But basically, his horses continually ran further than they had done in the past or previous to coming into his barn. So I am so happy to see that some of these trainers that we had suspicions about are starting to get their due, and starting to get their time off, their vacation time, their suspended time. And tip of the cap to HIWU, because I know that one of the things that Lisa Lazarus and her team said time and time again when they were first entering the industry is that it wasn't just drug testing they were focusing on; it was also the investigative part. And I think it was that combination that ultimately is bringing Diodoro to serve his time. And there was another guy, Joe Lorenzo Ruiz, who isn't as well known here on the East Coast, but is certainly well known in the West Coast. And he is suspended 6 to up to 7 years. I'm not even going to try to name the name of the medication that he was allegedly using. But another guy who got a 6 to 7 year ban handed down for using the banned substance for 3 positive tests for banned substances and aggravating circumstances. He got an additional year for that. So it was 2 years for each of the 3 times his horses tested positive, and then 1 year for quote unquote aggravating circumstances that he got the extra year for. He's getting fined close to $100,000. And basically he brought it to arbitration, and the arbiter penalized him that additional year for, like I said, aggravated circumstances. So again, I am glad to see that Lisa Lazarus and her team are cleaning up the sport, in a methodical way. Would we all like to see it faster? Absolutely. But I know, and in this world that we're in that is so litigious and constantly wants to fight back when they know that they're guilty in certain cases, that that HIWU has to go through the process and make sure they have an overabundance amount of evidence to make sure that these guys go away and never come back. I read an interesting tweet, and take it for what it's worth, saying, "Hey, how could you do that? This guy was a hardworking trainer, and he was an outrider when you caught him, and how is he supposed to feed his family?" Well, you know what? Don't fucking cheat if you want to try to feed your family. And if it says that you aren't allowed on the racetrack, even as an outrider, then you're not allowed on the racetrack. There's a lot of other places to get a job outside the racetrack when they say you can't come here.
Yeah, the thing is, there's been a lot of rancor around some of the HIWU suspensions, which I get, because there are some people maybe who have been innocent along the way and have gotten ensnared in something that's just kind of a therapeutic overage or an oversight or something like that. But that's kind of what you have to put up with along the way if you're going to get these big fish. They're not going to get it right all the time. And I agree, in terms of upending people's lives, we have to be as sensitive as possible, and we have to have as much support for them as possible to be able to defend themselves. And I think that's something that's been done better over time, with HIWU having basically a pro bono legal committee that you can go to when you want to fight the case. But, for all the negative headlines and all the people railing about how this is, the destruction of the sport and blah, blah, blah. A lot of crickets right now from those same people when a guy like Robertino Diodoro gets busted. So you can't have it both ways. Right. You can't complain and cry every time someone that you personally like might get tripped up along this, and then still be happy that they're getting the major cheaters allegedly out of your way. Like it's a process. It's not going to be perfect, but in what other circumstance would we have had this kind of headline? Robertino Diodoro was suspended for the first 2 weeks of the Oaklawn meet because of a positive test from last meet. That would have been the end of it. Like that these guys, and that's the thing we complained about for a long time. These guys can just get their 7-day or 14-day suspensions and their $500 fines forever. It's never going to change the way that they do business until you come in and you pop them for a lengthy amount of time. Then maybe you start to get a culture change.
Joe, I know you're an analyst and you like to look at the racing form and the sheets and really go through the numbers. I'm going to throw some numbers at you that are really going to impress you. They're non-racing. They have everything to do with our podcast, our fledgling podcast, which is strengthening and improving every week to the point where we are right now with 37 shows under our belt. Hold on to your seat, Joe. You ready? After 37 shows, a mere 37 shows, we have surpassed over 1 million YouTube views. That's 1 million. That's one with 6 zeros after it, if you can imagine. Now,
that's why you're an accountant.
That's why I'm the numbers guy. So, yep. Now, just as a comparison, do you know how many shows it took to get to that point at the previous one?
I'll say 60.
You're close. It still hasn't happened. It didn't happen in our lifetime. That's the important thing. Okay. 1 million YouTube views. We have over 4,500 subscribers already. Now, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't subscribe. And I know, Joe, you like to do the subscribe here or anything. So please subscribe. But the majority of the 4,500 subscribers are industry insiders. They listen to what we have to say. We've increased our monthly fan base month over month from the beginning, 9 months ago. We unmasked the elusive Tinky, and that his shows averaged over 50,000 views, each time. And then finally, Joe, I don't know if you realize this, but this little podcast, we are poised to be the most widely streamed podcast in the entire thoroughbred industry. I would say the over-under is probably like 5 more shows, and we will be the most widely streamed podcast in this industry. So I have a tendency to compliment myself. Joe, thank you. Thank you for being my partner on this, my co-pilot, and really the driving force to doing Rail Talk podcast. And again, also thank you to our sponsors for jumping in with us and trusting that we're going to be a success. I don't think that any of them even thought we were going to be this amount of success this quickly. So thank you to Fasig and the Green Group, and of course, TaylorMade. Incidentally, I got a nice note from Mark Taylor after we sent them these numbers saying, you guys are the TaylorMade of industry podcasts.
That's the highest compliment there is. Yeah, no, it's been so exciting, and I want to shout out to people who stop us at like OBS or at the racetrack or something and say how much they enjoy the show. That's a big part of it. Is just being out in the world and hearing that feedback. So we're very appreciative of all the fans and everybody who watches and reaches out to give us some encouragement or even some constructive criticism. But yeah, it's been a team effort. It's been great. It's been our vision from the jump. Me, you, John, and our producer, Patty Wolf, of course, and our excellent associate producers. We could not do the show without Anthony LaRocca, Aaliyah LaRocca, Nathan Wilkinson, and Julia Agresta. It's a team effort. I love working with you guys. I'm so proud of the growth of the show. I'm so proud of the impact that I think we're making more and more as time goes on. As you said, it's evident when guys like Tinky want to come on and do their reveal on our show. I think that's because they appreciate the conversations. Tinky appreciates the conversations that we're having. And I love it. I love getting on this mic with you every week, and it always feels better. It always feels like a little bit of family therapy. We laugh, we cry, we crack jokes on each other, and we hope that comes across. So yeah, continued growth for Rail Talk and the Rail Talk Nation. We'll see you next week. Might have a special show next week. We won't kiss and tell just yet, but there might be a special show in the works for next week's episode of Rail Talk. So we see you then back here on Rail Talk.